Billionaire signed over his fortune to Mistress, not knowing his pregnant wife was an undercover FBI agent, a multimillionaire, a cunning mistress, a pregnant wife who hides the ultimate secret. She's an undercover FBI agent, determined to unveil a labyrinth of deception. You'd think this is the plot of a pulpy novel, but it's the twisted reality of Jonathan Pierce's life. High-stakes real estate deals, lavish parties, and hidden motives collide in a single moment of betrayal. When Jonathan signs over his vast fortune to his calculating lover, only to discover he's stepped into a trap far more intricate than he ever imagined. If you're ready to witness a heart-stopping tango between love, lies, and the law, stay tuned. Jonathan Pierce was the embodiment of the American dream. Raised in rural Ohio by hardworking parents who labored in a local factory, he grasped the concept of ambition early on. As a teenager, he mowed lawns to earn extra money, making sure he saved every penny. After earning a scholarship to a prestigious business school in New York, Jonathan devoured every finance book he could get his hands on. By the time he turned 25, he'd launched a small real estate consultancy in Manhattan. His business grew slowly at first, then exponentially as the housing market boomed. At 35, he transferred his operations from New York to the swanky neighborhoods of Los Angeles, where a single property sale could net millions. One particularly lucrative deal led to a friendship with Matthew Brown, a senior executive at Chase Bank's West Coast offices, though friendship might have been an overstatement. Matthew was more of a beneficial connection, leveraging Jonathan's success to curry favor at the bank. In turn, Jonathan gained privileged access to favorable loan terms and insider whispers about prime properties about to hit the market. Around this time, Jonathan met Rachel, a bright, thoughtful woman who claimed to be an administrative assistant at a federal agency. She had a disarming smile and an even more disarming sense of confidence. He noticed her at a charity function for the Redwood City Children's Hospital, an event organized by their mutual acquaintance, Caroline Lake Quintero, a well-known philanthropist. Rachel and Jonathan started talking over a glass of champagne, and he found himself captivated. Although extremely career-focused, Jonathan had grown tired of shallow relationships. Rachel was different, witty, principled, and seemingly uninterested in his money or standing. Before long, they were dating exclusively. When Jonathan suggested marriage, she paused, took a breath, and then said yes. She didn't talk much about her job, only that she worked in a sensitive office environment for the government. Jonathan respected her privacy. Besides, he had his own secrets: aggressive takeover deals, shell companies set up overseas, and real estate flips involving questionable parties. If Rachel could keep hush about her line of work, Jonathan was more than happy to keep hush about the intricate web of his business dealings. Money was rolling in, yet that old hunger for more never ceased. While outwardly charming, Jonathan was also cunning enough to bend rules to his advantage. He worked day and night, fueled by ambition. Still, part of him felt incomplete, as if all his achievements were fleeting. He was a man of extremes, philanthropic on the surface, unscrupulous behind closed doors. In the glitz of Beverly Hills and the hush of private dining rooms, Jonathan encountered Ava Rosetta. She was introduced to him at a high-profile real estate conference, leaning in with a smile that spoke of secrets. Ava was a consultant for luxury retail brands, though many whispered her real specialty was manipulating wealthy men. Something in her eyes piqued Jonathan's curiosity, and from that moment on, he was poised on a precipice he didn't even know existed. Ava Rosetta was everything tabloids and gossip columns loved. She was rumored to have grown up in Italy, though no one could confirm if her childhood was in Florence or Milan, or if that was even true. She spoke with an accent that sounded vaguely European, enough to intrigue wealthy men, but too vague to pin down. She had a habit of dropping references to her grand villa on the Mediterranean coast, though again no one had seen it. Jonathan liked mysteries. He told himself that befriending Ava was just a business opportunity. She purported to have connections in Asia and the Middle East markets. Jonathan had been eager to tap. "We should collaborate," she purred one evening at the Starlight Lounge, an upscale bar in downtown Los Angeles. Her fingertips brushed the rim of her wine glass, and her eyes never left Jonathan's face. "I have a client in Dubai looking for a new investment in Los Angeles. Perhaps you could broker the deal." Jonathan agreed, partly for the potential profits, partly out of curiosity. Over the next month, they had a series of meetings, some in corporate offices, some in more intimate settings. Their conversations blurred from talk of business into flirtation. Ava had a quick wit and a sharp mind. She was not only gorgeous, but also clever. Jonathan found himself confiding in her, joking with her, even revealing some of his more cunning investment strategies. Soon, the late-night texts and quiet dinners overshadowed the professional line they had tried to maintain. When she boldly kissed him outside his Mercedes one evening, Jonathan was too caught up in the heat of the moment to remember he was a married man. He'd been traveling constantly, rarely home. Rachel, still working her mysterious federal desk job, hardly questioned his late arrivals. She seemed exhausted some days, though she never spoke of stress. Jonathan assumed her job demanded long hours too. Ava had a way of making Jonathan feel invincible, as if together they were unstoppable. She celebrated every success with him, showering him with praise. Whenever he set up a lucrative deal, she'd squeeze his arm and say, "This is why I trust you." He found her unwavering admiration addictive. He knew the risks. He was a high-profile businessman. An affair could lead to a scandal, or even worse, blackmail. However, what he didn't know was that Ava had an agenda beyond seduction. She was adept at playing the long game, and Jonathan, drunk on ego and desire, was her perfect mark. One night, he decided to test her loyalty. He hinted about certain unscrupulous practices, offering mild confessions about paying off inspectors to pass questionable properties or using straw buyers for hush-hush transactions. Ava seemed unruffled, even enthralled, leaning in closer and murmuring, "You're so clever. People don't realize what it takes to stay on top." In that moment, Jonathan felt a twisted sense of validation. Here was a woman who admired not just his success, but also his willingness to dance on the edge of legality. He never considered that she might be dancing, too, following a choreography of her own design. While Jonathan sank deeper into his clandestine liaison with Ava, Rachel Pierce was dealing with her own labyrinth. She was, in fact, not an administrative assistant, but an undercover FBI agent, Special Agent Rachel Donovan, assigned to investigate major financial crimes. She'd built her backstory meticulously. By the time she met Jonathan at Caroline Lake Quintero's charity gala, her false identity was so airtight, even seasoned criminals wouldn't have suspected a thing. Rachel's superiors at the Los Angeles FBI field office had flagged Jonathan Pierce. His real estate empire was rumored to be a funnel for money laundering. A few wealthy clients had ties to organized crime in Eastern Europe. The FBI suspected Jonathan either knew or chose to remain willfully ignorant. Over the next few years, Rachel's assignment was to gather evidence, identify Jonathan's associates, and uncover the full scope of his wrongdoing. Yet something unexpected happened. She fell in love with him. In the early days of their relationship, he'd been sweet, attentive, and surprisingly empathetic. Their courtship wasn't just a cover for her operation, it felt real. When they got married in a small ceremony overlooking the Pacific, Rachel's superiors greenlit the act as part of the larger plan. Still, her heart was no longer just an operative's heart, it was a wife's heart. Then, she found out she was pregnant. This changed the stakes dramatically. No one in the bureau had seen this coming, least of all Rachel. She was determined to protect her child, protect the mission, and, if possible, guide Jonathan away from a path that would inevitably destroy him. Yet her duty was clear. If it came to a choice between the bureau and Jonathan, she had sworn an oath to serve justice. She noticed the changes in him, the late nights, the uncharacteristic secrecy in areas that had nothing to do with business. She began to suspect he was having an affair. It stung. She had believed he loved her genuinely. In a sense, she had grown protective of him. The idea that he might betray her with another woman grated against her sense of reality. Still, her primary objective was to bring down a financial crime empire. She had contacts within the bureau, like Special Agent Karen O'Leary, who constantly reminded her to keep personal feelings in check. Karen would say, "We can't afford to let emotions get in the way, Rachel. If Pierce is crossing legal lines, you have to collect evidence." But Rachel wasn't simply a spy. She was now a soon-to-be mother who had to consider her unborn child's future. Did that future include a father behind bars? Did it include her arresting the father of her child? The weight of her double life pressed down on her. If Jonathan ever discovered the truth, how would he react? And what about the woman he was rumored to be seeing, this Ava Rosetta? Rachel resolved to maintain her composure, gather more intel, and wait. She'd learned that timing was everything in an FBI operation. Waiting, though, became more difficult every time she felt their baby kick. Chapter 4. The Temptation of Power rewritten. 800 words. Jonathan Pierce had always considered himself a driven man, but after moving his real estate operations to Los Angeles, he felt unstoppable. Every new contract he signed seemed grander than the last. Every party he attended introduced him to bigger names in Hollywood and politics, and every rumor about his extravagant lifestyle only fueled his ambition further. At 35, he was rubbing shoulders with high-powered moguls, tech billionaires, and influential celebrities who wanted a piece of his success, or at least a seat at one of his much-touted investor soirees. He had, of course, worked tirelessly to reach these heights. Like many self-made millionaires, Jonathan prided himself on resilience, a combination of punishing work hours and a willingness to seize any opportunity, ethical or not, that presented itself. The handful of questionable deals he'd pursued in the past seemed trivial compared to the windfall profits they generated. And in an industry where fortunes could be made or lost in a single transaction, Jonathan wasn't about to apologize for having the nerve to play on the edge. For a time, it felt as though the universe itself was rewarding him for his daring. Daily updates from his brokers detailed bidding wars on his properties. Bankers rushed to offer him low-interest loans. Investors fought for a chance to fund his next project. Journalists began calling him the dealmaker's dealmaker, an epithet that Jonathan secretly savored whenever he read about himself in glossy magazines. Amid this euphoria, Ava Rosetta emerged as both a confidant and a tantalizing distraction. She had started as just another contact, an alluring consultant who specialized in international partnerships. He first met her at an industry convention in a sprawling Beverly Hills hotel, where her sharp wit and melodic accent instantly commanded the room's attention. Jonathan, never one to shy away from curiosity, made it a point to introduce himself. Before long, they began discussing the possibility of cooperating on overseas ventures. Ava had connections in Asia and the Middle East, she said. These were precisely the markets Jonathan yearned to enter. Their lunches evolved into late afternoon drinks. Drinks turned into dinners, and dinners slipped into nights spent whispering over candlelight. The more time he spent with her, the more Jonathan felt that she was equal parts muse and partner, someone who not only understood the scale of his ambitions, but encouraged them. Back home, Rachel, Jonathan's pregnant wife, sensed a growing distance. Jonathan found himself making excuses for his late returns, blaming lengthy conference calls with overseas investors or urgent property tours in another city. In truth, his mind was almost always on Ava. Though Rachel didn't confront him directly, her occasional pointed questions told him she suspected more than he cared to admit. Guilt gnawed at him in quiet moments, but he quickly learned to bury it beneath the excitement of seeing Ava or the thrill of closing his latest million-dollar deal. Ava, for her part, played her role flawlessly. She listened attentively when Jonathan bragged about a recent sale or confided in her about a risk he was about to take. In those intimate moments, her eyes would light up with admiration. She flattered him without overdoing it, carefully fueling his ego until he believed he could do no wrong. Whenever Jonathan hinted at some of the grey areas of his business practices, hinting at bribes or hush-hush payments, Ava was never shocked or appalled. Instead, she'd lean closer, smile conspiratorially, and softly murmur, "That's why you're so successful. You don't let anything stop you." In those words, Jonathan found validation for his increasingly audacious schemes. He began funneling more resources into unorthodox investments, trusting that Ava's connections would open a gateway to global expansion. The two of them started speaking dreamily about building an empire that would rival any of Los Angeles's old guard real estate families. Yet for all their grand talk, Jonathan noticed something else about Ava that he initially chose to ignore. She was extremely guarded about her past. She mentioned having grown up in Italy, but the details shifted whenever he asked for specifics. One day, she waxed poetic about summers in Tuscany. The next, she boasted about her father's business in Milan. Small contradictions cropped up, but Jonathan was far too enthralled to examine them critically. Simultaneously, Rachel's own world grew more complex. As an undercover FBI agent, though Jonathan still believed she was just an administrative assistant at a federal office, she had new leads to follow and fresh tips to pass. Suspicious financial flows had recently surfaced in Jonathan's business records. Shell companies, accounts in the Cayman Islands, and rumored ties to Eastern European figures raised multiple red flags. With each passing day, Rachel's superiors demanded more evidence linking Jonathan to money laundering. If she kept digging, they could blow the entire case wide open and potentially bring down an entire network of criminals using real estate to clean dirty money. And so, while Jonathan was wooed by the glamorous and seemingly powerful Ava, Rachel was quietly gathering information. She noticed the surge in Jonathan's travel and the hush-hush nature of his new deals. Late at night, she would check her secured FBI laptop, cross-referencing property transfers and comparing suspicious patterns that matched known money laundering tactics. As her pregnancy advanced, she found herself increasingly torn between her duty to the law and her affection for her husband. Was Jonathan an unwitting participant in global crime, or was he actively feeding from the trough of illegal profits? Jonathan, oblivious to Rachel's hidden identity, continued to chase new triumphs. Parties at his mansion grew larger and more frequent, attracting Hollywood actors and political influencers. Cameras flashed as he and Ava entered high-profile galas, her hand elegantly draped around his arm. Tabloids began to sniff out a possible romance. The public, however, remained unsure. Was she a new business partner or his mistress? As rumors swirled, it was Ava herself who suggested a more formal arrangement for one of their biggest upcoming deals, a massive waterfront development in Singapore that could net hundreds of millions of dollars. Due to international laws and time zone hurdles, she insisted she needed the authority to sign certain documents on Jonathan's behalf. At first, Jonathan hesitated. Even amid his haze of infatuation, granting someone legal authority to act on his behalf felt perilous. But Ava, in her characteristic style, eased his doubts. She reminded him of the complexity of the transaction, how critical it was to move swiftly before rival investors caught wind of the opportunity. She reminded him of the trust they'd built, and, most seductively, she reminded him of the legacy he was trying to create. "We're destined for more than just LA," she murmured late one night, her voice low and velvety against the backdrop of flickering fireplace light. "This is our gateway to becoming unstoppable, Jonathan." His pride swelled with the idea of going global, overshadowing any lingering reservations about signing legal documents that granted Ava far-reaching power. His attorneys barely glanced at the clauses, presumably believing any associate of Jonathan's was above suspicion. Finally, with a flourish of pen on paper, Jonathan sealed not just a business partnership, but also a silent pact of vulnerability, granting Ava partial control over his sprawling financial empire. In his eyes, the move was a calculated risk. It reaffirmed his unwavering belief in his own luck, his knack for sensing the next big wave. But on that fateful day, Jonathan Pierce failed to consider one undeniable truth: luck is as fickle as it is intoxicating. And sometimes, the wave that seems set to carry you to new heights is the very one that pulls you under, leaving you gasping for air when it finally breaks. Ava excelled at emotional games. She sensed Jonathan's guilt regarding his pregnant wife, so she played her cards carefully. She never outright demanded he leave Rachel. Instead, she painted visions of their dazzling future together, urging him to seize destiny. Sometimes she'd say softly, "Those who hesitate miss their chance at greatness." But manipulation wasn't Ava's only tool. She peppered her seduction with vulnerability, telling Jonathan tearful stories about her so-called troubled past, how she'd grown up poor, how men had used and discarded her. Whether any of it was true hardly mattered. Jonathan was hooked. He vowed he would protect her, that she would never want for anything. Rachel, on the other hand, was watching from behind the scenes. She'd quietly shadowed Ava on a few occasions, suspicious of her background. By combing through digital footprints and contacting foreign intelligence liaisons, Rachel discovered that Ava Rosetta had multiple aliases. One of them was connected to a notorious con artist who'd swindled European aristocrats out of millions. The woman was smart, cunning, and very dangerous. In a clandestine meeting with her FBI handler, Agent Karen O'Leary, Rachel expressed alarm. "Ava is no casual affair," she said. "She's a professional predator. Jonathan might be in more trouble than we initially thought." Karen looked grim. "Isn't this exactly what we needed? Let them entangle themselves. If Ava's got her claws in him, they might make mistakes. We'll catch them both." Rachel clenched her fists. The idea of Jonathan, her child's father, going down for conspiracy alongside Ava was gut-wrenching. And yet, her oath as an FBI agent demanded loyalty to the mission. She reported everything she learned, praying that maybe, just maybe, Jonathan could be spared if he cooperated. Unaware of the net tightening around him, Jonathan juggled a life of extramarital excitement and corporate expansion. One of his biggest gambles was about to bear fruit. A waterfront development in Singapore, financed by an offshore entity that Ava introduced. He anticipated millions, maybe billions, in profit. The project's scale was unprecedented. Ava assured him all the paperwork was in order, that the foreign investors were legitimate. Jonathan rarely questioned it. He was used to skating by, trusting backdoor deals without verifying all the details. A legal formality emerged. Ava needed to represent him in certain negotiations, requiring legal permission to act on his behalf. Initially, she asked for limited power of attorney. Jonathan hesitated. This was a significant step. Just for the Singapore deal, Ava insisted. And only because of the time difference and the complexities of international law. She placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "I'd never betray you." His ego won out. He signed the document. That single act was a snowflake that could trigger an avalanche. Because the paperwork wasn't limited to Singapore after all, it contained small clauses enabling Ava to manage or transfer assets from multiple holding companies. She had effectively gained the keys to Jonathan's kingdom, waiting for the right moment to use them. Meanwhile, Rachel's morning sickness subsided just as her anxieties skyrocketed. She was now 6 months pregnant and growing more alarmed each day. How long until the entire house of cards fell? And when it did, how would it affect the child she was carrying? In honor of a significant charity initiative funding youth education in underserved communities, Matthew Brown of Chase Bank organized a grand gala at the opulent Aurora Hotel in Beverly Hills. The guest list read like a who's who of Los Angeles elite, celebrities, politicians, tech barons, and, of course, real estate moguls like Jonathan Pierce. Jonathan arrived with Ava on his arm, both dressed in understated elegance that somehow eclipsed everyone else. Rachel was noticeably absent, having declined the invitation under the pretense of illness. In truth, she preferred to stay away from the public spectacle while monitoring developments from behind the scenes. The gala's highlight was an auction, with items ranging from rare artworks to all-expenses paid trips to exotic locales. As the evening wore on, Ava mingled effortlessly, flirting with potential investors. Jonathan surveyed the crowd, indulging in that smug satisfaction that came with recognition. People approached to congratulate him on the rumored Singapore deal. He soaked up the compliments, hardly noticing the flicker of tension across Ava's face every time someone mentioned his pregnant wife. Halfway through the night, the lights dimmed. A hush swept over the ballroom as the MC introduced a surprise speaker, Caroline Lake Quintero, the philanthropist who had brought Jonathan and Rachel together years ago. Caroline was widely respected for her charitable endeavors and her straightforward moral compass. On stage, she spoke passionately about the charity's mission before her voice turned somber. "I'd also like to address a troubling trend in the philanthropic community," she began gently. "A growing number of false promises, of manipulations that exploit generosity for personal gain. Let's be vigilant. Money can be a powerful force for good, but it can also corrupt, destroy, and tear families apart." Her gaze swept the room, momentarily landing on Jonathan. He felt a jolt of discomfort, as if she were speaking directly to him. There was no direct accusation, but her words struck a chord he couldn't ignore. During the reception that followed, Caroline cornered Jonathan by the champagne fountain. "I see you're doing well," she said, her tone friendly on the surface but laced with concern. "It's been a while since I've seen Rachel. How is she?" "She's great resting at home," Jonathan replied, trying to maintain a confident smile. Caroline's eyes flickered to Ava, who was currently laughing boisterously with a group of businessmen. "Yes, I see. Must be nice to have company when your wife can't attend." The implication hung in the air. Jonathan cleared his throat, offering a forced laugh. "Caroline, it's not what you think." She raised an eyebrow. "I hope not, for your sake, Jonathan." The rest of the night passed in a blur of forced small talk and social niceties. Jonathan felt an uncharacteristic wave of unease. He tried to bury it in champagne and flattery from peers, but it lingered. When the gala ended and he and Ava stepped into the waiting limo, she seemed distant. He asked what was wrong, but she just smiled faintly and said, "Sometimes I think you forget the power you have, Jonathan. Don't let anyone shake you." He nodded, but Caroline's warning and the guilt gnawing at him wouldn't dissipate. In the back of his mind, he wondered if he was truly in control of his destiny, or if he was just another pawn in a far bigger game. Days after the gala, tensions escalated. Jonathan, usually self-assured to the point of arrogance, sensed that eyes were on him watching and judging. Phone calls from his business contacts felt strained. A couple of his long-term partners hesitated to sign on to new deals. Rumors circulated that the authorities might be probing major real estate players for financial crimes, and Jonathan's name occasionally surfaced in those whispers. Meanwhile, Rachel attended her routine checkups, every ultrasound a reminder that she was bringing new life into a precarious world. She quietly built her case, retrieving documents linking Jonathan's offshore accounts to suspicious entities. Late at night, while Jonathan slept or stayed out with Ava, she'd be on her laptop, sending encrypted reports to the FBI. She also discovered that Ava had cunningly siphoned funds. Smaller accounts were suddenly drained. Additional lines of credit opened under Jonathan's name, but never used for real estate acquisitions. Rachel realized Ava was assembling a safety net, or perhaps building a war chest for an eventual betrayal. And Jonathan, blinded by lust and ambition, was practically handing over the keys to the vault. Uncertain how to proceed, Rachel confronted Karen O'Leary. "We need to move faster," she insisted. "Ava's going to rob him blind, possibly vanish. And Jonathan, he might be left penniless before we can even bring him in." Karen listened, but remained cautious. The Bureau wanted a slam-dunk case, one that would not only implicate Jonathan, but also entrap any larger criminal networks funding him. "We're close, Rachel, but not yet. We need more." Caught between her loyalty to the FBI and her concern for Jonathan, Rachel decided to issue a subtle warning. One evening, when Jonathan finally came home, she sat him down. She chose her words carefully, hinting that not everyone in his orbit was trustworthy. "Not all business partners have your best interests at heart," she said, gently touching his arm. Jonathan scoffed. "You have no idea what you're talking about. I've been doing this for years, Rachel. I know who to trust." "You sure?" she pressed, trying to remain calm. "Because it seems like you're juggling riskier deals than ever before. If something goes wrong, you could lose everything." His eyes flashed with anger, though a flicker of doubt crossed his expression. "I'm fine," he said through gritted teeth. "I don't need your advice on business." With that, he stormed out, presumably to Ava's penthouse. Rachel sank into a chair, feeling the baby kick. She placed her hand on her belly, tears burning at the corners of her eyes. She was supposed to bring him down, but she couldn't help wanting to save him. The next day, Jonathan tried to patch things up with Rachel by taking her to lunch at a quiet bistro. The meal was awkward. She could see the guilt in his eyes, and he could see the frustration in hers. They both tiptoed around the real issues: his affair, her FBI assignment. The secrets piled up, forming an unspoken wall between them. Little did Jonathan know that the cracks in his empire ran far deeper than a marital rift. Ava and the FBI were converging upon him from opposite angles, and if he didn't open his eyes soon, both forces would consume him whole. A cool morning breeze swept across Beverly Hills, rustling the palm trees outside Jonathan's estate. He awoke to frantic phone calls. His accountants, his lawyers, and even Matthew Brown were all trying to reach him. The gist was the same. Large sums of money had vanished overnight from multiple company accounts. Panic coursed through Jonathan. He immediately thought of hackers or corporate espionage. But as the calls continued, a darker, more personal suspicion took shape. Rushing to his home office, he logged into his financial dashboard. His face went pale. Millions of dollars had been transferred to unknown offshore accounts. In many transactions, Ava's signature, granted by the power of attorney he had so naively signed, authorized the transfers. He grabbed his phone to call Ava, but it went straight to voicemail. Text messages remained unanswered. Suddenly, Rachel appeared in the doorway, alarmed by the chaos. He glared at her, resentment flaring. She had warned him, and he had ignored her. Now he was paying the price. He summoned an emergency meeting with his top legal advisor, Michael Anderson, from Anderson and Associates. In the midst of that frantic conference, Jonathan learned that Ava had indeed forged or utilized the broad authority she held. The documents she'd tricked him into signing weren't limited to the Singapore deal. They allowed her to control practically every account he had. "She's cleaned you out," Michael said grimly. "We need to act fast. Freeze your accounts. Alert the authorities." Jonathan recoiled. Alert the authorities? That was the last thing he wanted. He knew the FBI had been sniffing around his business. Reporting this crime might open a can of worms about his own illicit activities. But if he didn't, he'd lose everything. In a haze of desperation, Jonathan did both. He froze his accounts and placed calls to private security firms, hoping to track Ava down. She seemed to have vanished into thin air. News quickly spread through his professional circles, some discreetly gloating at his misfortune, others genuinely alarmed. Rachel watched all of this unfold with conflicting emotions. On one hand, it was an opportunity for the FBI to gather more intel if Ava tried to move those stolen funds through recognizable channels. On the other, she worried that Jonathan's entire empire and his sanity were collapsing. She questioned whether Ava had orchestrated this as part of a larger scheme. Perhaps she had powerful backers, or she was working for criminals who wanted to sabotage Jonathan. Jonathan retreated to his study, pouring himself a tumbler of whiskey despite it being only noon. He locked the door and stared at the empty screen on his phone, debating whether to leave a furious voicemail for Ava or remain silent. He couldn't believe how easily he had been duped. That night, Rachel tried to console him, but he refused her comfort. "Just go," he muttered. "I need to figure this out." As she left, he punched the wall in anger, jarring a priceless painting off its hook. It crashed to the floor, the frame splintering. Jonathan sank to his knees, overwhelmed by the weight of his mistakes. Little did he know, Ava's betrayal was only the first domino. Forces far larger than a greedy mistress were about to reveal themselves, and the woman he'd pushed away his pregnant wife was entangled in it all, wearing a badge he never knew she had. In the days following Ava's disappearance, Jonathan's empire teetered on the brink of collapse. His lawyers scrambled to salvage deals and reassure investors. Some clients, aware of the fiasco, demanded refunds or cancelled contracts. The rumour mill churned, with speculation that Jonathan Pierce was finished a cautionary tale of hubris. Behind closed doors, Rachel Donovan, known to Jonathan as Rachel Pierce, met frequently with her FBI colleagues. Their mood was urgent yet celebratory. The stolen funds created digital footprints, which the Bureau's cyber team traced across multiple jurisdictions. This was the break they needed to piece together the entire puzzle. Yet Rachel couldn't help feeling a knot of despair in her stomach. She was 8 months pregnant now, and stress weighed heavily on her. She stared at confidential memos detailing the money laundering networks Jonathan had tapped into, some unwittingly, some knowingly. Ava's betrayal also inadvertently exposed criminals in Dubai, Hong Kong, and even parts of Eastern Europe. The potential for a massive sting operation was enormous. "Rachel, we're getting close to the finish line," Karen O'Leary said in a hushed tone. "Next week, we'll have enough to arrest Jonathan. The question is whether we can coax him to cooperate. If he does, we might roll up a dozen other major players." Rachel's heart pounded. She wanted to protect him somehow, but justice had to be served. "He might not listen," she said quietly. "His pride is colossal. He'll never admit wrongdoing unless he sees no other option." Karen nodded, looking sympathetic. "We'll need you to be there when we bring him in. Your presence might be the only way to keep him calm and to convince him to flip." As the scheduled operation drew closer, Rachel wrestled with an impossible emotional burden. She was carrying his child. She genuinely loved him, and yet she'd been deceiving him since day one. She had to keep telling herself this was for the greater good, for the law, for the people harmed by these criminal enterprises. Meanwhile, Jonathan spiraled into a paranoid state. He fired employees he suspected of betraying him. He changed passwords, shut down offices, and avoided social gatherings. Rachel knew he was close to his breaking point when he asked her, late one night, "If I lost everything tomorrow, would you still stay with me?" She stroked his hair and whispered, "Yes, of course." But it felt like a knife twisting in her gut because the next day she'd walk into the FBI field office and plan his downfall. The tension between them was palpable. Jonathan started drinking more, barely sleeping. He scoured the internet for traces of Ava, even hiring a private investigator who turned up nothing except forged IDs and dead ends. Rage mingled with heartbreak. He'd staked his future on a phantom. Unbeknownst to him, he had one final chance to reclaim any vestige of control if he cooperated with the FBI. But for now, he had no idea that his pregnant wife, the one person he believed was in his corner, was the Bureau's secret weapon. The day of the FBI raid dawned crisp and cool. Black SUVs lined the street outside Jonathan's Beverly Hills mansion, ready to swoop in once the signal was given. A team of agents, coordinated with SWAT, preparing to serve a warrant. Karen O'Leary led the briefing inside a mobile command center parked discreetly a few blocks away. Rachel stood to the side, her heart pounding and her protruding belly a stark reminder of the stakes involved. She'd been assigned to approach Jonathan first, to calm him and ensure he didn't do anything rash. After all, an agitated Jonathan could destroy critical evidence, or, worse, harm himself. By 6 a.m., the operation was set in motion. Rachel entered the mansion using her key. Jonathan was in the study, hunched over a laptop, looking like he hadn't slept. She noticed empty bottles of energy drinks and a barely touched sandwich on the coffee table. "Jonathan," she began gently. He glanced up, eyes bloodshot, expression haunted. "Rachel? What are you doing up so early?" She braced herself. This was the moment of truth. "We need to talk," she said quietly. She approached him, placing a calm hand on his shoulder. "There's something I have to tell you." Then the front door burst open. Agents flooded in, guns drawn. Shouts of "FBI, don't move!" echoed through the vaulted halls. Jonathan stood, alarmed and furious, confusion turning to horror. "What the hell is this?" he yelled, as armed agents secured the perimeter. Rachel reached into her pocket and pulled out her credentials, her FBI badge. She saw the shock on his face, followed by disbelief, then betrayal. "Jonathan, the first, so sorry. My name isn't Rachel Pierce. It's Special Agent Rachel Donovan. I've been investigating you for financial crimes." He recoiled as if struck. You set me up." His voice cracked with anguish. Tears blurred her vision. "I didn't want it to end like this, but you can still help yourself. Please, Jonathan, don't resist." Karen O'Leary stepped forward, reciting Jonathan's rights as agents began bagging evidence, laptops, phones, files. Jonathan stood paralyzed, eyes darting between Rachel's badge and her swollen belly. "What about the baby?" he asked in a strangled voice. "Was that a lie too?" Rachel's eyes brimmed with tears. "No, it's real. Our child is real." She placed a trembling hand on her abdomen. "I love you, but I had a job to do." For a moment, he looked ready to lash out. Then defeat settled in. He dropped to his knees, hands on his head, as agents approached with cuffs. The once mighty real estate tycoon was now on the floor, undone by the two women who had each held him under different spells. Ava, who robbed him blind, and Rachel, who'd never been just a loving wife. Outside, the sun rose higher, casting long shadows across the lawns. Jonathan Pierce, the millionaire magnate, was led out of his home in handcuffs. The world he had painstakingly built crumbled behind him, leaving an eerie hush in its wake. In the weeks that followed, headlines blazed with the salacious details. Millionaire signed over his fortune to mistress, not knowing his pregnant wife was an undercover FBI agent. Every news outlet seized upon the scandal. Late-night talk show hosts lampooned Jonathan's downfall. Memes circulated online, turning his tragedy into viral entertainment. Jonathan was held at a federal detention center while prosecutors prepared a mountain of charges: money laundering, conspiracy, wire fraud, and a slew of lesser offenses. He faced decades in prison if convicted. His attorneys mounted a frantic defense, hinting that he'd been manipulated by Ava, though it was uncertain if that argument would hold water in court. Ava, meanwhile, was nowhere to be found. The Bureau believed she'd used the stolen millions to vanish into a maze of false identities. Some speculated she was in Eastern Europe. Others claimed she'd fled to the Caribbean. Her whereabouts remained a mystery, though her involvement had given the FBI enough leverage to bring charges against other criminal financiers linked to Jonathan's business. Rachel Donovan, 8.5 months pregnant, was placed on administrative leave pending internal reviews. She'd carried out her mission successfully, albeit under extraordinary emotional strain. Alone in her sparsely furnished apartment, she struggled with the conflict between her duty and her feelings. She'd never imagined she'd truly love Jonathan or that they'd conceive a child. Now she was about to be a single mother, an FBI agent under scrutiny for how close she got to her target. One afternoon, she found herself summoned to a meeting with the U.S. attorney overseeing Jonathan's case. "Agent Donovan," he began, "we're at a crossroads. We want to offer Pierce a deal if he testifies against certain high-level criminals. But he refuses to speak with anyone but you." Her heart jolted. "He wants to see me." The U.S. attorney nodded. "We can arrange a monitored conversation. He may cooperate, but only if you're the one who asks." Rachel's emotions were in turmoil. She remembered the look of betrayal in Jonathan's eyes when he saw her FBI badge. Could she face him now? Would he even forgive her enough to help the government's case? Part of her still believed there was good in him. Perhaps with nothing left to lose, he'd do the right thing. When she finally sat across from him in a sterile interrogation room, Jonathan looked gaunt. He had dark circles under his eyes, and his once immaculate suit was replaced by a prison jumpsuit. Still, he managed a bitter smile. "Rachel, or should I say Agent Donovan," he began, his voice hoarse. She swallowed hard. "Jonathan, he cut her off. "Don't. I know why you did it." He glanced at her belly, now obviously pregnant. "I just can't believe I fell for both of you, Ava and you. One robbed me of my fortune. The other robbed me of my life. At least you gave me a child." The statement stung. She fought the urge to cry. This wasn't a time for emotions. They were there to negotiate. As the minutes passed, she laid out the possibility of a plea deal. He could reduce his sentence significantly if he helped dismantle the criminal ring he'd been entangled with. Jonathan hesitated. Rage, regret, and sorrow flickered across his face. In that moment, Rachel realized how deeply he'd been wounded. Eventually, he spoke in a low voice. "I'll cooperate on one condition. Let me see my child after it's born." Rachel blinked away tears, her voice trembling. Of course you can see the baby." They sealed the arrangement with a nod, though neither dared to reach out physically. Their story had become something too fraught for simple gestures. Outside the interrogation room, the FBI and legal teams prepared for a new phase of this high-profile case. And yet, for Jonathan and Rachel, the aftermath would be just as complicated: two people bound by love, betrayal, and a child who would inherit this twisted legacy. Jonathan Pierce's testimony proved vital. Under protective custody, he identified shell companies, key players, and backroom deals that extended from Los Angeles to Kiev and Dubai. Indictments poured in as the FBI dismantled a global money laundering syndicate. The media christened it the Pierce Conspiracy, though the real web reached far beyond him. In the swirl of legal battles, Rachel gave birth to a baby boy. She named him Daniel, a name she and Jonathan had once considered in a casual conversation before all the truth spilled out. She informed Jonathan of the birth through an official channel, including a photo of Daniel wrapped in a tiny blue blanket. Jonathan was transferred to a medium security facility to await sentencing. His cooperation had earned him some leniency, but he still faced multiple years behind bars. On a cold day when the sky threatened rain, he finally met his son in a drab visitation room. Rachel stood across from him, holding the baby in her arms. Jonathan looked vulnerable, stripped of the arrogance that once defined him. Tears glistened in his eyes as he gently touched Daniel's tiny hand. "I'm sorry," he whispered, voice quavering, "for everything." Rachel's gaze softened. She wasn't here as an FBI agent, but as a mother, co-parent, and perhaps still someone who cared deeply for this man. "I know," she replied. "We all make choices we regret." In the months that followed, Rachel navigated single parenthood while continuing her FBI career under reduced duties. She received both commendations for successfully closing the case and scolding for allowing emotions to cloud her judgment. Yet she was too tired to dwell on bureau politics. Her priority was Daniel, ensuring he grew up in a stable environment despite his father's notoriety. Meanwhile, Ava Rosetta remained at large. Occasionally, rumors emerged, a woman matching her description spotted in Monte Carlo, or a Swiss bank account closed under one of her aliases. The FBI was on the hunt, determined to apprehend her. Jonathan, ironically, hoped she'd be caught. Perhaps it was a twisted desire for closure to confront the woman who had fooled him so completely. As time passed, Jonathan found a semblance of solace in prison. He took classes, read voraciously, and even mentored younger inmates. Sometimes he wrote letters to Daniel, letters Rachel kept in a shoebox to give to him when he was old enough. Over time, the public fascination with his downfall died down. People moved on to the next scandal, forgetting the millionaire who'd lost his empire to a seductive con artist and an undercover FBI wife. But for those entwined in the drama, the legacy lingered. Rachel felt it every time she saw Daniel smile, glimpsing echoes of his father. Jonathan felt it each time he closed his eyes in his cell, remembering the empire he once had, the family he nearly kept, and the illusions that shattered him. Life moved forward, not in the triumphant arcs people might expect, but in slow, painful steps. For Jonathan, those steps led to a measure of humility. For Rachel, they led to a challenging blend of regret and renewed conviction. And somewhere in the world, Ava Rosetta likely continued to spin her web of deceit, perhaps targeting her next unsuspecting prey. Through all of this, one truth stood: Jonathan Pierce had signed over his fortune, only to discover that true fortune, a family, a conscience, couldn't be signed away or stolen. It had to be earned, and in a twist of fate, perhaps this was the lesson both he and Rachel had to learn in the hardest way possible. Thank you for journeying through this tale of ambition, betrayal, and hidden identities. Jonathan Pierce's downfall reminds us that in the pursuit of power, we can become blind to what truly matters. And when secrets unravel, they often come at the highest price, one that no fortune can repay. Rachel Donovan's struggle highlights the cost of wearing two faces, torn between duty and love. Meanwhile, the elusive Ava Rosetta stands as a haunting warning. You never know who's holding the sharper blade in a game of deceit. If this story gripped you from start to finish, consider showing your support. Like, share, and subscribe for more riveting tales and dramatic exposes. Let's continue exploring the stories that lie beneath polished surfaces and whispered promises. Until next time, remember, truth may be buried, but it can never truly stay hidden.